Thanks so much for coming to the third and final lecture in our media literacy series with our trusty guide, Robert Rogers, and his knowledgeable intern, Andrew Melendez. We have dug into our history, we have surveyed the current information landscape, and now we are at the final lecture where we get to delve into the toolkit. We're going to end on hope. Hope gives us the advantage, right? Anyone who's done competitive sports knows how powerful hope can be. If that doesn't resonate, anyone who has beat an illness or a life-changing diagnosis knows how powerful hope is, right? So that's important. We know what is before us now. We know the challenges. So what are we going to do about it, right? If you are thinking to myself, I am going to become a member of the Friends of the Livermore Public Library, then you're on the right track. So for a short commercial break, please welcome our wonderful friends of the library.
Thank you, Emily. Hold it together. Hi. My name's Dennis Barley. I'm the president of the Friends of the Livermore Library. This is Sally Esser, and she is our treasurer. You've probably, if you've been here before, you've heard this spiel, but I'll do it again quickly. The Friends of the Livermore Library was formed in 1978 by a group of Livermore residents who were concerned that after the passage of Proposition 13, the library's budget would be affected, which it was. So our mission is to support the library in all its various programs, and we do that by raising money. Over the years, we have raised over $1 million and donated over $1 million to the library and its various programs. Last year, we donated about, $74,000 to the library's programs. We raise money in 3 different ways: through membership dues, through additional donations, and sale of used books in our bookstore, which is, as you probably know, located right off the library lobby when you come in. So for those of you that are already members of the Friends of the Library, thank you for your continued support. And if you aren't, we would encourage you to join. And you can do that very easily by filling out one of our, one of our membership forms. There's also a donation box in the back if you would care to donate for tonight's program. And I'd like Sally to talk a little bit about the financial end of things.
Okay. So I would like to tell you, too, that if you don't want to become a member, if you don't want to feel that obligation, you're welcome to just donate. That's great. Donations are always helpful. Members have the ability to vote on the officers once a year, but it's not necessary to become a member in order to donate. Also, I've been coming to the library for years. My kids did the summer reading program. I've shopped at the bookstore over the years. I've participated in the literacy program as a volunteer over the years. But until I joined as a member, and then shortly thereafter as treasurer, I had no idea how much the Friends do for the library. No conception of how many programs they fund, including programs like this and the summer reading program and the Latinx Hispanic Heritage Month celebration and Black History Month programs and arts and authors, including Jazz in July. They're just all sorts of things. And now also the winter reading program as well as the summer reading program. So we wouldn't have all of these things if it weren't for the Friends. So if you want to become a member or would just like to donate, it would be great, and it will all go to good purposes.
Right. Good. And I just wanted to add, it's very inexpensive to join the Friends. It costs $10 a year. And with that $10, you get $10 redeemable in the bookstore. So it's a win-win. So that's it for us. Emily?
I just had this epiphany that last lecture, so lecture 2, somebody asked about NPR. Was there anybody here who that was you? So this was just like our NPR pledge-a-thon, and I think it's a very apt connection because I was wanting to yell from the back, support NPR. Just like these wonderful news institutions, public libraries, keep the Republic informed and keep the Republic educated, and so it's important that we all support the cause. Without further ado, let's welcome Robert Rogers again to the podium to give us all of the tips and tools in navigating complex digital media.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much, Friends of the Library, for your presentation and your ongoing support. Give me just a moment as I get this microphone set up. In a democratic society such as ours, how we function as democratic citizens goes far beyond who we vote for or where we are on election day. It's about how we engage with our fellow citizens in the world, the activities we engage in. To use an old and somewhat quaint idea, the associations that we become a part of. That was a big deal in the 80s and 90s, and it's still a big deal today. And, not most importantly, but very importantly, it's how we choose to use our economic votes, our dollars. And so when you support institutions like the library with your money, when you support institutions like local small businesses, when you shop local, your dollars are compounding in a way that are directly benefiting your lives. And so I always give that spiel in my own private and public life. In whatever community I'm in, I talk about shopping local, supporting local institutions. I think that's true. And then globally, of course, supporting institutions of a free society. And that includes things like libraries and a free press, of course. What if I were to tell you that journalism, far from being dead, as so many have said, had one of its most incredible, impactful, powerful moments in the last 30 years, just a few years ago? And what if I said that that occurred on the strength of a late night cryptic tweet by an actress at the seeming nadir of her professional popularity? How could that be? Impactful journalism occurring, cryptic tweet, what a paradox. We're talking about digital information and all the ways that is bad for our societies, but in this case it was turned good. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about a tweet that came out in 2017 that said, something to the effect of, I was raped, sexually assaulted by a prominent Hollywood producer. Wow. This wasn't just a piece of degraded discourse on Twitter where we see something, retweet something, delete something, forget about something. No, this one had resonance. And it had resonance not particularly because of the Twitter bots or the Twitter trolls or any of those things. It had it because there were two very important, very strong, very smart, very engaged and passionate women journalists who had a job to do. They saw this tweet and they thought there might be something there. They'd heard rumors. They'd heard unsubstantiated claims. There had been words swirling around the Hollywood industry for years that actresses were often disrespected and more so even abused, even raped, and that they paid a cost to move up in this industry, right? Disgusting, heinous practices. But no one could get there to fix this. The courts couldn't help. The police departments couldn't help. Law enforcement agencies. Of course, the industry itself, its self-regulation, not working. Those gears grinding to a halt, excuse me. This is the kind of space, this is the kind of social ill where so often we've seen there's only one hero or shero to call. And in this case, it was the free press. And what you had was two journalists who were curious and had reason to be and worked at institutions that supported that curiosity and supported probing an industry to find out what the truth really was. This wasn't about how to get the most clicks or how to befriend this industry or that industry or how to sidle up to this interest group. This was only about the truth, capital T. And in this case, a truth that could radically change lives and indeed would go on to radically change a culture. So how would they get there? Twitter wouldn't get them there. They could send out a few tweets here and there, maybe engage with somebody, but nobody was talking. What must they do? Well, these courageous journalists, they did something that's pretty old-fashioned now. They traveled and they went places and they knocked on doors and they tried to meet people, and they did. And then they encountered people who knew stuff but were afraid and didn't want to go on the record. Then they encountered other roadblocks, big money roadblocks, not just in the sense of the power of the institutions they were looking at, putting under scrutiny, but also the power of legal agreements meant to subvert the truth. In other words, victims being paid off and forced to sign under legal counsel retained by the powerful that would muzzle them and deprive the world of the truth and deprive them the opportunity for justice. Who can fix this problem? Only journalism can. And these journalists, they didn't get there easy. After all of that, they faced threats of their own litigation. And then ultimately, the closer they got to that power center, the closer they got to the villain, in this case, a very powerful man, the more vigorous, the more ominous the threats became. I'm telling the story right now, maybe many of you already know it. I'm telling the story of Harvey Weinstein, the big-time Hollywood producer. But more importantly, I'm telling the story of the two journalists who uncovered this and sparked this and beat the investigators to the punch, beat everyone else to the punch, unearthed a crime, a series of crimes, a heinous culture that destroyed lives for decades, unearthed it, exposed it, put it up to democratic scrutiny, brought justice to people, and changed the world, changed the culture. Are women in this industry, in all industries, are they safer now because this journalism was done? No question about it. What a powerful move. While journalism seems to be dead in so many ways, or at least dying, sucking for its last breaths, retreating from communities, capital industries, ripping out its entrails, no more people at the desk, there's still journalism going on. Journalism still matters. Please bring up that next slide, Andrew. And you'll see that there is, you probably also noticed from lecture 1, a pretty obvious echo. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Hegel said, one thing we learn from history is that we never learn from history. In this case, we're learning from history, and the parallels are right there, right? Woodward and Bernstein in 1972. Woodward is in his apartment, and he gets a call to go down to the courthouse and check out the arraignments. And he discovers somebody being arraigned for a burglary at the Watergate Hotel, right? That's the late night tweet. Then they go around and they try to follow the money, and they get dissuaded, and there's power involved, and nobody wants to talk, and everybody's afraid. That's these courageous journalists talking to victims in Hollywood. Then they get close to that power center, and they're about to make a move. And the Nixon administration and their lawyers try to knock them down, right? Tell Ben Bradley they're going to take his paper from him, right? The Post will be on the hit list. The IRS sanctions are coming, right? And they still move forward. And fittingly, that's Woodward right there. Woodward interviewing the authors of first the stories, and then it came out in a book, just like Woodward and Bursey's book came long after their stories. The echoes are amazing, right? And what it proves is in 1972, we had a high point in journalism in terms of resources, prestige, trust, and so forth. Woodward and Bursey had a whole lot easier a job. These women had it way tougher. They were facing a whole lot more in terms of headwinds. Who changed the world to a greater degree? You leave that to history, but I think it's at least equal, right? Sure, they toppled a corrupt administration affecting politics and geopolitics for generations to come. But these women have made our sisters, our daughters, our mothers safer in all industries. That's the power of journalism. That's the power of having the intent not to malign, destroy, sidle up to, curry favor with, lie. That's the power of searching for truth. And if our market's not supporting it, then we need to figure out a way to support it. Well, with that, let's go into tonight's discussion. As we've said before, if we were around 20 years, 2003, we'd have a whole different discussion. We'd be talking about digital publishing technologies, the democratization of information, and how this was going to allow us to be better in terms of connecting, sharing information, keeping accountability of governments, and so forth. But instead, the opposite to some degree has happened. We didn't account for the authoritarians and their ability to use these technologies. We didn't account for government and big tech subverting the democratic process to some degree, looking at us more than we look at them often. And we also didn't account for our own failings as humans, our mammalian brains being onslaughted by these incredible technologies and us feeding into this degraded public sphere. Welcome to the age of information, which is also the age of disinformation and misinformation and groupthink, and what the Rand Corporation called in a very influential study, truth decay, which they define as the diminishing roles of facts and analysis in public life. That's what we're really suffering from. Diminishing role of fact and analysis in public life. What's true matters less than what I'm passionate about, what I identify with. And this is something that is very corrosive in too large a dose to our democracies. Our belief in not only truth, but institutions is failing, is dropping. We've seen that before with the previous data that we've looked at. In some ways, just examining history really quickly, the 17th and 18th century, this period of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and so forth, that was a moving toward truth, how important it was to have information, how it made democratic societies possible. The 19th century saw something different, a new movement, right? Information as power rather than as truth per se. I have information, I use it in a way to project my power. The 20th century, roughly we'll call it post-Civil War to our recent times, a reemergence of that Enlightenment idea, this belief in truth, openness, transparency. So we may be in a period now that is more similar to the 19th century philosophically in terms of the value of information and how we use it. Information not as truth or as fact, but as power that allows me to project my beliefs, my ideas, and so forth. So, what's our thesis tonight? It's pretty simple. Without substantial interventions at the personal, social, societal, and institutional levels, we're in trouble. We have to have a whole basket of interventions here for us to avert a catastrophe, to turn this needle a new way. And it starts with us individually, and it goes to our social institutions, our communities. It also includes many stakeholders, including big tech themselves, and the government, of course, our government. We need to focus on three areas: education, institutions, and innovations. Now, when I talk about education, I'm talking about news literacy and digital literacy, critical thinking, curating socials. Think of your information like your diet, right? Like your nutrition. We must think of it that way. It's becoming so pervasive, and it's having such a tremendous impact on our health and our well-being that it is more on par, not with the book that sits on the shelf, but with the meal or the snack that sits on the table. These are inputs that are impacting our ability to see the world and our ability to be healthy and interact with each other and our society in a healthy way. Institutions need to get healthier as well. We need to save and bolster the free press, schools, libraries, government, and so forth. And innovations, legislation, and technology. We must have technological fixes at the tech level, as well as policy innovations. And policy innovations are very dangerous, double-edged sword as well, right? We know, again, there's a very delicate needle that we have to thread, right? Which is, how do we optimize these digital technologies, communities, these communications tools? How do we optimize them for maximum democracy and minimize risk, while not destroying what's most important, right? Which is our ability to freely interact with each other and share information. This age is also, not only is it marked by democratic peril, it's also marked by incredible technological innovation and many social innovations that make us happy as well. Being able to talk to our friends, our coworkers, being able to shrink the world and interact with people of different cultures and different places. There are many positives to be had here. And we lose that if our policy tools are more cudgel than scalpel. Let's go to the crunchy slide, please. I want to get into a lot of really crunchy tools. I want to really outfit our toolbox here. And we're going to talk about all of these things in more detail, but it's going to be clean and terse and nice. Education, institutions, and innovations. News literacy, you see that. This is a lot on the personal level. We talk about psychology in the last one. Institutions, we're going to talk about innovative ways. It's not enough to say we need to support these, we need to back these, we need to be passionate about these, although that's very important. Nothing else happens without that. Nothing happens without our passion and awareness. Knowing there's a major problem and being impassioned to do something about it is the first step. But we need to talk about details of how to make these things happen. And then the part that I'm most excited about, what I personally like, is the innovations part. Legislation and technology. We're going to get into a lot of that. These are ideas that you're going to be able to take and actionize to the greatest degree you'd like. Now, also just a few years ago, while the great journalism was occurring in the She Said book and that whole series, and the exposure of Hollywood's system of degradation and destruction of half its workforce to some degree. At the same time, in Myanmar, we had something else happening. A lot of this well beyond the scope of our daily lives, what we normally see. But this gave us an incredible peek into the dystopian future that could await, absent intervention. The World Health Organization and Amnesty International called this one of the greatest, one of the greatest political instabilities and tragedies that have occurred so far with these digital technologies. And what we basically had was, in Myanmar, military personnel, the regime in power at the time, they commandeered Facebook. Now, part of it was that Facebook is a much different animal in some countries than it is in ours. I heard someone who says on the Facebook Community Oversight Board say that essentially in America, and in many other places as well, all the problems we see in Facebook, and yet we're seeing the platinum Facebook. If you want to see Facebook run amok, if you want to see what can happen in a place where democratic institutions are not as strong, then you look at what's happening in some developing countries, where Facebook becomes the only outlet for news, is totally believed by the vast majority of people who consume it, because we have the lack of institutional support, plus the innervation of people's ability to even disentangle truth from falsehood, and then the commandeering of the powers that be. And so what did they do in this case? Well, they basically flooded Facebook with their operatives And they created a counter narrative in their country that essentially said that the Muslim population there was an enemy of the state in some degree, and they sowed the seeds for the violence that followed. And more than 10,000 perished, political instability reigned, and Facebook formally apologized. The lawsuits, of course, have lined up. The resolution may not be there, but the country is still in tatters. The people are still dead. Facebook's sorry, they want to do better. They're going to make innovations, but you can't pick up that spilled milk anymore. This is the kind of stakes that we're dealing with if we get this wrong. Let's move on to the Mueller report. At the same time, we saw a less violent version of this here in our own country. And I won't go into the details much, but you get the basic picture. And the basic picture is the Russian government absolutely had a coordinated effort to destabilize our democracy using our technologies, Facebook being their key weapon, and it worked. Stress test, maybe. Opportunity to get better, yes. But the costs are still there. We will be paying the costs for a long, long time, right? The world that we live in today is one that was irrevocably damaged and changed by what occurred here. So, let's get back into how do we harden ourselves, right? There's that phrase, target hardening, right? To make yourself or something, anything, more resilient to some sort of attack, whether that be natural, man-made, so forth. We know about libraries, universities, senior centers, public education, adult education, community education. Yeah, we are going to need to initiate an entire campaign here, right? We've seen it before, but this one hits different. There have been times when finance education has really been in vogue, right? All these millions of people graduating public schools with virtually no education in finance, then becoming easy marks for predatory lenders, sophisticated actors who take advantage of them, right? It's a similar story here, but it's even more dangerous because it's not just economic growth or income inequality that's at stake, although those both play roles in what I'm about to say next, but it's democracy itself at stake. And I remember being in high school and having a finance class, and that finance class was a great one, and I had a great teacher. And I never forgot some of those lessons, and it absolutely enhanced my life moving forward. The basic lessons I heard there about how to protect myself, right, against predatory institutions, how to empower myself through investment, the kinds of things that might be able to help myself and the people around me, right? That's what we absolutely need now in this more complicated and much more dangerous information environment. I think it's an apt analogy. Our information environment compared to our free market environment, which for all of its great virtues also includes a very punishing reality for those who are ill-equipped to participate. If we are ill-equipped to participate, that reality darkens for us all. Let's bring up the next slide. Of course, it's always nice to get bucked up by Tocqueville and Jefferson again about the value of these things. But absolutely, really prescient and really amazing, the foresight, especially that Tocqueville had, being a Frenchman coming to America and examining our nascent country in the 19th century and saying the newspaper is a more necessary proportion. What's the key point there, right? Maintain civilization. He's talking about our civilization, right? Maintain our civilization. Because we were like nothing that he had ever seen before. And then, of course, Jefferson waxing poetic with his typical anti-government stance on top of that. That's interesting. Adult literacy programs need to play a huge role as well. So, what I'm talking about is almost like a Marshall Plan or a Manhattan Project, if you will, about we need a massive effort nationwide to provide people the tools to navigate this new information environment, right? Your library should have classes on this kind of topic, workshops. NGOs, nonprofits, they're already in this space. There are many of them. We're going to talk about some of them later. Private, public, our school systems, our universities are, thank goodness in America, our incredible universities have been a big part of our rise and our beautiful country and its development. And our universities, as usual, are up ahead. Many of our great universities have institutes that are on this very topic. And they're providing public education, not only to their classes and to their students, but they're also doing it in their communities. Stony Brook comes to mind in New York, and many more. Let's Go Trust Project. The Trust Project is one of these nonprofits that's working in this space. There are so many, right? And what they're talking about is they're giving people the tools to examine the information. We have to be more careful. When we just take the spigot, whatever that news diet looks like, right? Most of us are on our digital devices and we're seeing something. That's good. But there's a lot of junk food in there. And if we're exposed to too much of it all the time, it's going to get us. And so they talk about following news sources that exemplify best practices. Look at journalistic expertise, institutional knowledge. Reputation is big here. The problem with those things is the source of those trusted institutions, those have shrunken, right? It's a smaller pool to play in. I can trust my East Bay Times to use great ethics and do their best to gather news, but they're not covering nearly as much news as they used to. And the cohorts in the region are also very much downsized as well. And I was talking about using methods like lateral research, the tool of the internet. The problem is when I just grab the information that's sensational, that really stimulates my brain, and I run with that. And I don't take the time to look. We have the speed. The information comes at a greater velocity and a greater virality with the sharing. And a greater volume, there's so much of it. Comes in more, all those things. And as we know, more is not always better. And so what we need to do is we need to run counter to that in some way. In some ways, it's all so fast. It would be wonderful if all of this rapid information was of a high quality nature, but it's not. So we need to slow down. We need to think about that. Take a deep breath whenever you're consuming digital news. Look at it, discuss laterally, look at what other sources are saying about that. Take the time to curate your news feed. And big, I've said it before, I'm gonna keep saying it. Whenever you come across something that really outrages you, or really scares you, or really titillates you, makes you think, whoa, those are the times to be most skeptical. And even if it's the New York Times telling you something that's like that, still that, I'm certainly not saying that they've made something up, but they have one angle on that story. And furthermore, the headline is the sharpest angle of all. Headlines have been our nemesis since the 17th century, right? We know that looking at the headline is inherently misleading without the fuller context. We learned that a long time ago. Don't just read the headlines, right? When we were kids and the paper was right there. We need to relearn that because it's much easier not to do that. There's a stat out there that like more than 90% of stories that are retweeted, legitimate news stories, retweeted on X, not clicked on, not read, right? They're just the headline. And naturally, manipulators, disinformation actors, very sophisticated, they learned that a long time ago. Diverse voices. This is going to become more and more important. It already is, but it's got to become more important. And this is diversity of all kinds, right? I mean, obviously ethnic and cultural and gender diversity, but there's going to be diversity of geography, diversity of culture, diversity of nation, all those things. My theory is that we're darkest before dawn. What's going to happen, as we've always had in American democracy, when we have a great gaping social need that emerges, innovators fill that space. We have to be truly lied out, disinformation destroyed, before we might be able to build back something up that really values the value of combating disinformation. We may not be there yet. Let's go to slide 6. Truth decay, right? This is that concept that was talked about by the Rand Corporation. And this is their basic inputs, right? This is exactly what's happened, right? In a simplified conceptual form. But this has happened and is happening. And it's important to know, and it's important to act. Now, what's driving truth decay? We talked about cognitive biases, changes the information ecosystem, and so forth. They're all there. They're not going to go away. We have to bolster ourselves against them. And there are a lot of people who want to pin our hopes on Gen Z, and I do too. And I love Gen Z. And I'm always thinking about young people, both in my day job in government. I had a dozen interns this summer doing tremendous work. People who are really passionate about this country, about being a part of something special moving forward. But that Stanford study really gives me pause. The Stanford study showed savvy consumers of digital technology, young people, educated Gen Zers, 96% failure rate on a particular piece, sophisticated particular piece. But it was a news story with video, and we're going to see more and more of that with AI and deepfakes, photo and video hoaxes. They will soon get to the point where disentangling what is real and what isn't will be extremely difficult. I'm very scared about that on a technological level, right? The day will come so soon when we will see someone committing a crime or doing something terrible on video, incontrovertible proof, and it is fake. How do we figure that out? How are we going to disentangle that fake? But on the Gen Z, on the 96%, the students watched a video of some registrar of voters people pushing around votes in the election of 2020, right? And they're pushing around the stuff. There's the headline. There's a little bit of chatter. There's some talk over the B-roll. 96% thought that was legitimate proof of election fraud in the election, right? Fake news video. Fake news video. Deliberate disinformation to sow distrust in the very core of our democratic institution, our voting process. That's striking at the heart of our democratic experiment. We must support libraries and their vital missions. We once went to libraries to get the information we couldn't get elsewhere. Now we go for something more. We do want information, but the libraries of today and tomorrow, I'm really excited about the way they're growing, right? This idea of becoming truth spaces, safe spaces, places where people go to cut through the disinformation universe and be able to do things like vet information, get education, have, of course, public events, gather together, vote, talk about voter education processes, right? Nonpartisan voter education. The library re-emerging as a public square. I know this might sound silly, but think about it in this way. As a kid of the 80s, people bemoaned at that time the loss of institution and membership. Bob Putnam had a big book about that that's still famous today. And the idea was, what happened to the public square? How do we come together and nourish our democracy? And in the 80s, what stepped into that void, right? Imperfectly, but in my mind, it was the malls. Right? The malls across the country became the place that people went to talk, to eat, to sit on Santa Claus's lap, do all these different cultural things. I know that's where I went. I went to the mall about 50 times more often than the library in the 1980s. Well, we've lost malls today as our economy and logistics are changing, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe in that place, maybe libraries reemerge as a space where we learn together, and we eat together, and we vote together, and we share together, and we pursue truth together. The library as a place of robust programming, assets, learning, I'm really excited about that. I think it can play a huge role in empowering our communities. With that, I want to segue to the next spot. I really wanted to talk about science, but I was fumbling a little bit on that, and I hadn't really got my stuff together, and I realized Andrew has tremendous research on that, and I wanted him to come. And Andrew, please speak on science and tell us why that's so important.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, can you guys hear me okay? Awesome, great. Let me actually turn off this fan first real quick so it's not getting in the way. Yeah, it's so great to see everyone here for the third and final time. I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to help contribute to this amazing lecture series. I just want to get started to talk a little bit about just the importance of science. As you stated, Robert, it really is such an important way we can use this tool to fight misinformation in this deep age of the internet and digitization that we see today. And there's a lot to learn from it as well. But I want to start with just highlighting something really important. You know, when we look back at the entirety of our human history, we just really look back at the grand scheme of everything, we can really define the essence of humanity and our entire being as this innate pursuit of knowledge. From the great ancient thinkers of the past like Aristotle and Plato, all the way to the great thinkers of today, Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking. Our humanity is I like to call it a tapestry that's woven together by this pursuit of knowledge, of understanding, and of reasoning. But today, however, we find ourselves at a crossroad, one in which this, access to information and this amazing world that we live in today has ironically undermined the pursuit of knowledge that we hold on to, that we've held on to for so long. It's truly remarkable. And when I talk about this, like widespread access to information, I'm really talking about our smartphones, really is. With this access to information, we know, with the touch of a button, we have all information that came in the past, all the human information that we've collected today, and everything that will come in the future. And of course, that's really amazing stuff. I can't deny it one bit. But at the same time, and I think this is really important, this power, it comes at a cost. With this access to widespread information, of course, comes the opposite. Widespread access to misinformation within the sea of knowledge that we've been able to grasp with our hands. And we're starting to see the impacts of what that means for us today. I want to highlight just a poll that really just illustrates just kind of how this misinformation that we see today has been used to break down the scientific truth that we've held on to for so long. So there was a poll done in 2020, and it was just trying to figure out to kind of just gauge what people's confidence levels were in science and scientists. And in 2020, when they did that poll, they found that 40% of Americans, only 40%, said they had a great deal of confidence in scientists. That's less than half. That's really concerning numbers. But of course, it gets even worse. Just 2 years later, in 2022, they did that poll again, and that number dropped down to 30%. So we're starting to see how in this age of, global pandemics and climate change and so many problems that require science to bring us answers, people are trusting science less and less. And that, to me, I think is a really deep issue that we have to understand at the root level, we have to address now. But of course, the big question, and how do we do this? How do we ensure that we can protect the validity of science in this rapidly changing world? I think the answer lies in promoting scientific literacy. We need to encourage individuals to approach information with evidence-based knowledge so that we can better understand what is real and what is fake in this world of information, this world of smartphones, this world of internet. We need to understand, we need to discern much better. We need to adapt to this new digital age by supporting fact-checking websites, fact-checking sources that directly combat science misinformation claims across the web. We need to work to determine the accuracy of scientific information by ourselves, by looking past the headlines that we see on social media and actually reading it to see if it's real or fake. We need to actually make the critical research ourselves. But I think ultimately, though, we all need to make a commitment to nurture a culture in our own lives that value truth over convenience and accuracy over sensationalism. You know, this pursuit of knowledge has really defined us for centuries, as I illustrated before. You know, it's brought us from the darkness of ignorance all the way up to the heights of understanding. And today, in this new age, this new society, we cannot let that falter. And so, ultimately, what we need to do, just to summarize, we need to embrace this journey that we're on to really protect scientific accuracy. And we need to ensure that we're using the tools that we have today, science, government, free press, schools, libraries, but for me, I'm talking about particularly science, in order to move forward in a new generation that really does protect the truth. So thank you. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's not a coincidence, it's no accident that science and empiricism have been working in tandem with democracies and democratic institutions since our republic was founded, and that passions and disinformation have always been the supporters of authoritarians. No doubt about that. It's part of it that is integral to who we are and where we're going. Schools. You know, there's a lot about public schools that we need to bolster, we need to make better. It's important to remember that schools, why do we have public schools in this great country? You know, the idea was, some people will talk about, well, you know, it was oftentimes to, you know, it was built around the agricultural system and help people raise food and so forth. That's true, there was some of that, but at its heart, what's the philosophy behind a public school? It's about creating citizens who can exist and nourish a democratic society. That's what the public school's primary value has always been, bringing us together so that we can govern, right? The retreat of people and family from our public schools today, and I don't want to demean anyone who's going to a private school or a charter school. Charter schools are publicly funded, and you know, people, some people, homeschool works for some people, but the erosion of attendance at public school is absolutely something that attenuates our democracy, right? I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but those numbers are concerning as we retreat from another public space where we all engage in a shared diverse reality. The free press must continue to be supported, both in culture and in structure. So we got to understand the importance of it. We have to support it. We have to say no to people who are trying to say that the whole system is bad or rigged or journalism is dead or any of those things. And we also need to push our politicians to do more. We need to push our social media companies to do more. I say our social media companies as if they're just some little company that's part of this whole ecosystem of economic growth. No, no, no. These are mammoth. There's nothing bigger in the world in terms of a private institution than Facebook, Google, Apple, right? Market cap, bigger than anyone can ever imagine. They need to be part of the solution. And that means cultural support. That means technological support. It's going to mean resource support too, in my opinion. We're going to get into that more as well. Perhaps we need new government regulations on social media companies. Perhaps we need to insist on new taxes and subsidies. They are the richest market cap social organizations in the world has ever seen. And a huge part of that, I shouldn't say a huge part, a little part of it, right? They had this huge, incredible, decadent pie, and a little piece of that was the journalism that they stole everything from. They ripped all those ad revenues from. Now, early on, Facebook used to have some ideas about how they were going to empower local press. You're hearing less about that now. They need to be pressured to do more. Now, we heard about it last time, and I'll bring it up again. PBS for the web is an idea, right? This idea, what if we see a future where a new social network occurs, right? What if, now, again, very delicate in how government introduces itself into a free flow of information, right? Obviously, it doesn't matter who's in power. What matters is the ability to misuse that power, right? We can't favor one group over another, but the model like the NPR or the model of public broadcasting, that is a model that could be retrofitted for a digital age, right? I know NPR and PBS, they exist and they do well, but imagine the government subsidizing, with taxation from social media companies perhaps, subsidizing an independent body that then created a new social platform. And that social platform being populated by journalists and the like, and the value add that it insists on is true, scientific, and so forth, reputable information, right? A truth social, right? To borrow the phrase from someone else. But turning that on its head, making that a different model, it could be very good. The bottom line is that our institutions of law, democracy, culture, education, public libraries, and science, they all have to adapt. And they're adapting slowly, and that happens. I understand they're not going to adapt as fast as cutting edge technology, but the adaptation must occur, and we must be a part of that. People talk about anti-monopoly rules. Should we break up the big companies? Maybe, it's possible. But I tend to believe that the fertile soil from which the problem emerged will remain. If we break up Facebook and we break up Google and we have a more chaotic news information environment, we might just be opening spaces for something worse. In other words, bigness can be a good thing when it can be controlled. We saw that model to some degree during broadcasting in the 50s and 60s. Right? Big corporations, but licensing requirements that made them act more responsibly with the power that they had. That could be a model. So the problem right now is the power of the news feed and the search algorithms. What we have here is they are optimized for profit. And how do they get profit? They're optimized for engagement. And how do they get engagement? They're optimized for engagement through passion. And how do we get passion? Well, most of the time, it's from stuff that's not true. We don't get particularly passionate about the sober debate between candidate X and Y, or a long meditation on the value of public schools. The viral content that makes the money tends to favor the disinformation, tends to favor the titillating, the things that are noxious to truth-seeking. And this bleeds deeply into our political discourse and our political institutions. It's not just the last president who comes to mind right away as someone who really mastered this domain, right? But there are all kinds of elected officials all over the country who, what do they have to do to get money, to get elected, to get followers? They have to engage in this kind of stuff, right? If I am a public official and I want to gather energy and money and passion, I just can't do it sometimes by being that sober statesman. I have to do it by trafficking in the kinds of things that get me those passionate followers, that passionate dollar. So when we have an algorithm that is totally distorting our way of life, the way we interact with each other, and also distorting power relations, you really get an idea of just how pervasive and powerful this machine is, what it's done to us in all levels of society. We need more oversight. Absolutely. I definitely believe that we need a federal agency, and federal is the word here. We don't need a hodgepodge of state laws. We need federal agencies that are empowered to look more deeply and scrutinize these institutions. Require Facebook, on day one, if I could wager on on day one, I would have an agency that required Facebook to provide a great deal of what they consider proprietary data. Facebook knows more than anybody on earth how to manipulate human minds. And we need to understand what's going on there. Editors, newsmakers, journalists, scientists, politicians, the truth is we don't really know how this works. It's a black box. And they know. They have teams and they have software that know. And that information is just too important now to our public domain for it to not be in our province. Too important to be totally private. Self-correction is going to play a huge role. What we're going to have here is oftentimes in history, we've seen in our country that government regulation can have a lot of unintended consequences. I talked about a scalpel over a cudgel. So it's very fraught with peril for governments to go in here and try to start dictating the flow of information. In fact, I recoil at that idea myself, just on its face. But what we also know is that oftentimes it's the threat of regulation, right? Democratic impulse pushing the government of the people, by the people, pushing its elected leaders, and then those voices in Congress and the presidency and other places, they start growing louder for regulation reform. And what often happens? What do those private institutions do in the face of that? Our democratic backlash is still powerful. We still matter. And what do? That's when the self-correction kicks in, right? Under threat of regulation. We need more threat. What will the future look like? A better one? Well, it'll be like the algorithm will be radically changed. It's going to have to be modified away from what it is now. It's a monster. Now, maybe it's a little better than it was in 2020. It looks like it to me, but it's going to need to change further. We need to optimize for better content, more truthful content. Authenticity, trust indicators. There's going to be exciting digital and technological developments of how to make this happen. Now, on the one hand, we want anonymity sometimes in the public square so that we can freely talk, especially dissidents in war-torn nations or where political persecution is a real issue. We have to balance that with look what happens when we can be totally anonymous all the time online. Look at Twitter sometimes. Look at X with all of its trolls and bots. Oh, and by the way, I've said it before and I'll say it again, no free speech for bots. No free speech for robots. That's got to stop right away. That's very dangerous. And it's going to get much more dangerous. We don't know. Google engineers are quitting en masse because they're seeing what's going on behind the curtain and they're afraid. I'm afraid too. We need to get at this sooner rather than later. But we can't get at anything if the gears of democracy continue to be grinded to a halt by the disinformation campaigns that we've seen. Look at climate change, right? These shouldn't be partisan issues. These are scientific issues. But this is where we are. This is the world that we have today, thanks in part to the digital information that we have. We need to shift away from an attention economy, an engagement economy, to a truth economy. So, the time for action is now, and we have to be vigilant. Let's bring up slide 9, please. Yes. So, we have a lot to do. And let's go to technology first. Disclosure, identity, that was what I just touched on. That's got to be part of the solution. No one knows exactly what that looks like. There's going to be a lot of trial and error here. There's got to be an experimentation. But that's beautiful because that's what democracy is all about, right? Experimentation. We just hope that we don't have a catastrophic or existential event while we are doing the experimentation. And by the way, Congress, our government, we do need partners. We must partner with these institutions. Look at and I love Congress. I love Senate. I love the House. But look at those panels that are bringing Zuckerberg up in front of them, or you name your social media person. You name your tech bigwig. Look at those panels up there. Look at the questions they're asking. Do you want those men and women to be deciding how to make this technology work? No, right? They're there to protect us. They have to safeguard. They have to show us they know that when there's a problem, they know about democracy, but we need partners in order to refine technology to do so in a way that enhances truth, enhances the free flow of information that's necessary to democracy, and not degrades it. Delay slow virality. This one's big. Virality is one of the most powerful aspects of this, virality. Virality is the most democratic aspect of digital technologies. Anybody can get on it, anybody can share it. We're all equal. Wonderful, right? But it's also the most volatile, the most powerful. So what goes viral? It's 99.9 to 1. Viral is pretty much always bad stuff. And the good stuff, the broccoli that we need for our healthy democracy, is almost never viral, right? We have to have algorithms. The algorithms right now, they fuel that fire. They're gasoline that goes on the virality fire. It starts getting shared, it gets to get shared more. The technology enables it to happen. We got to put the brakes on that. We got to slow that down. And there's already some exciting work going on, like at X with that, and it works. The early data we have show that just slowing down the virality of disinformation in the very beginning, has a massive impact on where it ends up. Bolstering good information systems, that's the PBS for the web. We have to create more institutions that are about truth. We have the biggest institutions in the world that are really not about truth. We need to, it's not just about chopping them down, it's about building up new institutions that counter that. The tech companies, they are all about the profit, they're all about their shareholders, they need some democratic pressure. Deletion censorship. This happens, right? I know it's a scary word. I'm a First Amendment absolutist to some degree. But those tech companies, they're already deleting and censoring millions of communications daily, right? And for the most part, in my opinion, the right ones, right? Violence against children, slander of a private citizen. They'll remove these things, right? That's censorship, that's deletion. That's part of the solution as well, but a very potent and dangerous tool that must be used carefully. Intervene in crisis, oh, absolutely, right? 2016. When the Russians are in our systems, subverting our democracy, we need our tech companies to step up a little faster. They slept through the fire alarm there, right? That's got to be better. Community oversight, I'm big on this one, right? Facebook has a community oversight board. That's good, that's a step. There needs to be more of that, right? These companies, they might need to be forced, or under the threat of force, they'll do it, right? They'll create institutions of democratic oversight of their systems that are able to inform their policy, right? Right now, or at least so far, they've been 99.9 driven by profit, right? And profit's a big part of what makes these great. It has to happen, right? That's what funds the innovation and research for the future. But there's other inputs as well, right? This democracy is not just profit. Editorial judgment. Oh yeah. Facebook's got this. Now, in their defense, they're dealing with a volume of information that we've never seen before, and they're not trained news people, and they never endeavored to be so. But they're gonna have to play that role. This idea of, oh, we just have this space and people can just do whatever they want, right? And we delete it if we see something really dangerous, but otherwise it's all there. Well, first of all, that's not wholly true, because they've already got systems that, again, empower certain kinds of speech. They need to use better editorial control when they're talking about what's populating the news feed that is feeding our democracy. Legislation, our government plays a role in all this too, right? Regulatory bodies, mandated data transparency, I already mentioned that. Third-party immunity, that's a good one. But that's crucial. Now, I've read about some legislation in some European countries where they're basically trying to hold the newspaper or the social media hub or whatever, they hold them liable for third-party content. So I get on there, I lie about somebody, and that person could sue Facebook rather than me, which obviously they're gonna do because first rule of law school is you sue the deep pockets, right? We can't have that, unfortunately, right? It sounds like a good fix on its face, but that would be the chilling effect, right? That's why we fought so hard to protect newspapers in being able to publish things that the government didn't find fashionable at the time, right? We have to protect people who allow for, so in other words, if I use Facebook as a disinformation campaign, I should be responsible rather than Facebook, legally. That might not sound good, that might not sound like it's strong enough for some of your ears, we can talk about that more, but I do believe that. I really am afraid of chilling free speech, because I know that speech is a huge part of who we are and why we are who we are. PBS for the web, we talked about that. A couple of pieces of legislation to keep an eye out for. You can Google this right away. It's really fun, and this is an opportunity, especially one of them's a local congressman who I know is a tremendous man, who is a student of history and an inveterate book reader. Mark DeSaulnier is a great congressman, and he has a bill in there, a bipartisan bill, about making news organizations much easier, enabling. Number one, there's a ceremonial bill that is about really, saying what sentinels of democracy newspapers and news gatherers are. That's important. The ceremonial stuff is important. We got to always say that. But then the meat of it is he has legislation that basically lets news organizations be nonprofits. What is that? That's a government subsidy for news, right? I would have not thought that was the right idea 20 years ago. I think it's in the ballpark now. I think that our economy, we have a market failure in the gathering of news, and the government's going to have to step in. And tax breaks is a nice way of doing that subsidy rather than giving them direct money, right? The same thing we have for nonprofits and NGOs, churches, and so forth. That kind of thing could really enable news gatherers to re-bolster their organizations and provide content that we value. The problem is it's a self-defeating cycle. The newspapers get more and more hemorrhage, they lose more and more money, they produce a worse and worse product, they fall out of our lives, we wind up on Facebook. We have to rebuild from the ground up. The Warner-Klobuchar piece, that's another bipartisan piece of legislation. Bipartisanship, how wonderful, right? And they're talking about, I think it's very important, truth in political ads, right? They want anybody who's doing a political ad, now the definition of that can get dicey, but a political ad on a social media network to be subject to all the same regulations as if I handed it to your hand, right? We need that kind of transparency, absolutely. And they also have a resolution in there, I believe, about, they do not, but the protection against foreign attacks. We need that big time, right? And this is where America needs to lead on the global stage. Unfortunately, it's happening to some degree, but some of our global institutions have been to some degree weakened over the decades, but we need to take a leadership on this is a global issue, right? We need to create treaties and agreements between nation states to essentially outlaw what Russia did to us. Now, Russia in that case is a rogue state with an authoritarian leader. There's not a lot you can do, but you fashion a global coalition that respects sovereignty because we know that any of our nations, we can't just disrupt another nation by dropping a bomb on them anymore. We can do something that's a million times more effective than dropping leaflets on their towns. It's using these tools. So we need to stop that in its track. We need to work at a global agreement. Educational institutions. So of course we want to support universities, scientific organizations, private organizations, all of these things. We talked about libraries and free press a lot. I'd like to say on the nonprofits, NGOs, look for more and more of those out there. They're real leaders. Nonprofits and NGOs, I think, low key, are one of the greatest improvements in the last 30 years. Right? We've given them these tax favored status. Government has retreated a little bit from some spaces, and I see this daily in my government life. Right, where so much of what we do in our communities, so much of the resources we provide our communities, we don't directly administer them as the government. We have NGO and nonprofit partners, right? Neighborhood community organizations given tax-exempt status, then they jump through a bunch of hoops, they prove their competence, they prove their connection to the community, their ability to deliver the deliverables, then they win contracts from the government and they provide services more efficiently and better to local communities. Nonprofits are doing amazing stuff, experiments everywhere, not encumbered by the typical regulations and so forth. Nonprofits and NGOs, don't sleep on it. I mentioned the Rand Corporation, which has been around a long time, but then there's the Trust Project, right? And there's others. There are many others where great people are concerned, just like you and I are, and they create an organization to fill this social need. And then those are the ones who come up with the kind of innovations that change the world. Remember, it's the creative mind, the unencumbered mind, the mind that thinks differently that changes the world, the crazy ones. In fact, they're the only ones that ever really have. So, what do I want to leave you with? What I want to ask you to do? I want you to tell these kinds of things to your friends and partners. If you're on social media, I want you to talk about it a little bit. I want you, as a social media news consumer, I want you to use those kinds of ideas. Just take a break, take a slowdown, take a breath, right? Use your sharing power responsibly. So many of us don't. Clicking that share button is so easy, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon. But before you share anything, if you're a sharer on these things, research that carefully, right? Because if you are putting out something that's bad, I mean, you are hurting the people that you're trying to help. You're hurting your friends when you feed them. Because when they hear it from you, that's when they're going to trust it the most. We all must play a role There's the old RFK Sr. quote, from South Africa, 1966, where he said, "When millions of people each strike a tiny blow for justice, it's a small little ripple that reaches into a mighty wave." So think about that whenever you think, oh, it's just little old me, I can't make a difference here. No, you can, by being a responsible news consumer. Write your congressmen, write your congresspeople, talk to your, punish the politicians who are not sustaining or nourishing or understanding the threat to democracy, and support the ones that are. Because this is a big, big deal. Support journalism, support your libraries, support your schools. Be part of the solution. Be a responsible news consumer. Oppose incivility and disinformation every chance you get. Report if you see fake news. Report it to these platforms. They're supposed to do something about it. Seek truth all the time. Our democracy depends on it. Can we get that slide up, please? I like this one. I'm a firm believer in the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. Looks kind of fake, doesn't it? It's not fake. I vetted it thoroughly. I was going to lop off the beer part, but I said, no, that's very Lincoln. That's very 1980s. He would say something like that. Our nation and its media have both changed a lot since the 18th century, obviously. There's progress, and we've had progress, but progress, like justice, in Dr. King's famous quote, progress is a long arc, and justice is a long arc, and it's not a smooth one. There's bumpiness to it. But we are continuing toward change, and I do believe that the arc of history is bending toward democracy and justice. Our nation, our media, our information systems, they're all going to continue to change. But our spirit, believing in our democracy, that mustn't change. It's up to us, each one of us, our friends, our families, our colleagues, empower yourself. It's up to us to shape that future, to support our democracy, to make the world a better place, to keep the world around for our children, our grandchildren, and so many more. So with that, I want to hearken back to last lecture with the great words of Edward R. Murrow, and say good night and good luck. Now, happily, I actually kept my word this time and gave us some additional time. Did I not? Yeah. Terrific. So, let's have a robust discussion. Yes, please.
How can young people get involved?
Sure. Well, so I've heard this before, and I've also heard some people look at me distressed and say, my daughter wants to go into journalism, right? Isn't that job going to be gone? I don't want her to suffer a life of attack and not being rewarded, and obvious poverty is going to come with that and so forth. But I disagree, and I disagree very optimistically and very strongly. I don't think that's the case. I think that journalism, like many other fields, if your child, whoever they may be, first of all, just on a global scale, if your child is passionate about something and wants to study something in college, and you would prefer that they go into something that they think is going to be a little more financially lucrative or secure, I think that that's almost always the wrong way to go, right? It never really works. You say, well, be that investment banker, and you'll have a comfortable life for your kids. But what really matters is what we're happy doing, what we're passionate about. And now, cozy-feely part aside, I still believe that what you're passionate about will still pay if you do it. Journalism. So it has drastically shrunk, but there are incredible people still doing this job. And there always will be. Now, there may be fewer jobs to be had, but those who have them are passionate about them and doing quite well. The New York Times employs thousands of journalists, and they're doing a great job, and they're being paid pretty well. And there's other organizations as well. And if I believe firmly that in the future there will be regrowth in this space. I think it could be at the nonprofit level. And on top of all that, more practically perhaps, the market for the storyteller is maybe higher than ever, right? So I'm talking about journalism. I'm defending journalism. She's going to journalism. And when I was into journalism, when I went to school for journalism, I was passionate all the way. And I didn't want to work for anything else but I wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. And that really fired my imagination. But today, journalism and the places you can take those skills look different. Every organization needs a storyteller now. The governments are hiring all kinds of people to do quasi-journalistic work. Corporations, nonprofits. Everyone has to have someone to tell their story. That's a good thing, in my opinion, right? It decentralizes. Now, it of course can really open a space for bad actors. But what's wrong with Amnesty International having a team of social media storytellers that are able to produce all kinds of wonderful content that help their donors provide them? What's wrong with social media professionals working at the library to talk about all the great events that are coming up and why this is the place to be supported? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like that. I think that that's a place where you can be a great storyteller. I'm a storyteller now and I work in government. I scratch that itch in that way with the tools available. And also, I'll just end on this point, which would be when you think about the tools that are available to tell stories, and you think about what you can do, it's such a richer, more diverse opportunity now than it ever was before. And I also believe that in the future, there'll be a battle. The journalists of 1974 were really concerned with rooting out corruption in government and so forth, right? And the journalists of tomorrow will be too, but a big part of it will be, they'll be concerned with going against the AI story or the other powers that be at that time, right? So we're going to need our armies of journalists. We need them today. They're small, they're down, but I think they're going to come up. Thank you for your question. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about fact checkers? So, like, just as an example, I saw on the internet, I saw an article written in 1919, and I thought, well, is this real? Yeah. So I Googled a little something, and then I think it was Snopes or something.
Yep.
Is that a
Yes.
for-profit, non-profit? Who are these people?
So Snopes and factcheck.org are two of my favorite, right? And if you hear people saying that that's fake news, well, that's sad, right? That's the distortion of reality, right? People are. That's the situation where there's a complete inversion that's occurred, right? We have people that are really, really fooled. That's like my friend in the last lecture who believes that vegetables will kill you and vaccines and so forth, right? Vaccines and climate change, these shouldn't be partisan issues, right? Now, science always leaves room for, there's judgment, there's mistakes, we progress, right? But the intent is there to tell the truth. And no fact check organization is ever going to be 1,000% right all the time. You can't know all truth everywhere all the time, right? Now, AI will purport to do that at some point, and we must be guarded against that. But Snopes, in fact, these are nonprofit organizations. They're global NGOs is what they are, right? And they're growing, and they're doing better. And I think that space is going to be more and more occupied by more people. So Snopes and factcheck.org, two of my favorites. Very reliable, very good. Yes?
So the two columns on the right, technology
Could you go back, please, Andrew?
and legislation, are huge topics, huge.
Oh, yeah.
And mostly, at this point, aspirational in terms of shooting for it. But in the meantime, we're in real trouble in a lot of ways. So what are some, besides fact-checking on sites, in terms of the media that people consume, whether it be the New York Times or U.S. News, USA, whatever.
USA Today?
I'm seeing a chart where they list the major publications and put them on sort of a continuum, sort of maybe indicating that some of them are more center, some more liberal, some ultra-liberal, and the other way. So, I mean, I don't know who puts that together, but it can be helpful, from your own experience of reading to figure that out. So some of that should be more available to me, as far as I think, to the general public and the general reader. And the other thing, there is so much you can get through email.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
you can get,
Has anybody been getting the Epoch Times in their inbox lately?
yes,
Powerful.
yes, but then there are other ones like Axiom and there's a new one called, I forget now, but they try to summarize news for you so you don't have to read this long article, which who's got time to read all these long articles even though they explain a lot.
Sure.
Without trying to editorialize, and if you want to read more,
Yeah. I read digest from Politico, for instance, right? And I enjoy that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, so if there were lists or where people that have really looked into those
Yep.
put together and say, okay, these are good sources.
Yep.
So you can be more trustful of what's in them.
Yep.
Rather than just saying, okay, I gotta check everything every day.
Of course. No. So the key here is you want to curate your news diet, right? And I'm not saying that you want it to be, I want it to be diverse. I just don't want it to have a lot of Twinkies in it, right? The Twinkies are the Epoch Times of the world, right? So you curate your news diet, right? And like, so, what do I do? So what that means I have it on the social media platforms. I subscribe to emails from some of these, and then I subscribe to a real paper in some cases, right? So take stock of your news diet and then say to yourself, are they legitimate news sources or are they purveyors of disinformation? And if you want to figure that out, you go to the Trust Project, go to the Rand Corporation, the Truth Decay Project. Go to Snopes, go to factcheck.org. There's a lot of places that will put these on continuums, as you mentioned, right? Then I would say, try to be diverse in the point of view as well, right? So I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Washington Post, the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. They definitely have different editorial pages, and they definitely choose to pursue different stories sometimes, but the news gathering operations are still good. They're still to be trusted. They're still ethical. The problem has always been this false equivalency. Fox News created this in the 90s, right? Fox News said, that stuff is really liberal, and we're going to just be this conservative. So we're going to give you a nice, fair and balanced point of view. But the problem is that they've gotten worse to some degree, they in that ecosystem that they funnel into, the whole Breitbart ecosystem, they are not the same. This is a false equivalency, right? This is one area where a lot of people are just flat out lying, right? And they're just flat out telling you things that aren't true, and they're doing stuff like, for instance, internal memos show this all the time, right? During protests nationwide over police use of force, go to the cities and just get me pictures of fires, right? And then that night, there's fire everywhere, right? Our cities are burning in America, right? Is that responsible journalism? No. They didn't make up the fire, but that's a powerful distortion by omission, right? Distortion by focus. This is subtle. It's very sophisticated. It's very hard to know. So, back to this. So, and by the way, Fox News is not the same as the Epoch Times. Fox News is better than that, right? Some of these other ones are just, and then there's the I don't know, what Newsmax or something, right? Like, this stuff is, whoa, So there's gradations all the way down. So, anyway, I look at Fox News myself. I just want to see what's going on. I don't look at it a lot. But, I read the Wall Street Journal. I read the Washington Post. Now, they are more on a continuum. There's an equivalency there. The New York Times, peerless news gathering operation. And they also have plenty of space for people across the spectrum on the opinion page as well, right? It's still good journalism. Good journalism is still out there. The problem is we've had politicians and disinformation people and Russian operatives, frankly. It's really, the damage that the Russian operation did to our country in 2016 can't be overstated. It really can't. We just can't quantify it, but boy, it's bad. They injected a cancer into our system that we're still working through. And part of that, to make any of this other stuff work, you have to destroy the trust in the institutions of democratic value. Public schools are bad. New York Times is bad. Libraries are a waste of money. Blah, 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 right? They're all bad. That's how you lay the groundwork for the next phase, the authoritarian regime, whatever else. Our democratic institutions are strong enough in this country that they resist those kinds of things. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. We have democratic institutions. We beat those stress tests, right? But, the next time, and it could be somebody on the other side, right? The next time it might not work out so well. But that's the difference between us today and you name your fallen democracy in the past. And I don't want to bring up the specter of Hitler per se, but look at Germany, right? Germany in 1932 was in many ways the most advanced, educated, intelligent society on earth, right? A democratic society where they had great public health campaigns against smoking and all those other things, right? But they didn't have that history of democratic institutions. They didn't have the co-equal strong branches of government. So when somebody, doesn't matter who it is, when somebody comes in and wants to burn it down, literally and figuratively, they're able to do it. They're able to do it because those democratic bulwarks weren't in place there. That was the difference. And in many ways, Germany is smarter than us at that time, right? But look where you can go with the wrong information. In that case, at that time, radio was the powerful technology technique, right? And of course, destruction of the existing newspapers, rooting out those editors, all that was part of that as well. So, your news diet is like your nutrition diet. Take stock of it, look at it, how healthy. Where a nutrition, we're looking for vitamins and healthy and raw and real. And on this, we're looking for truth, integrity, right? Credibility, a good policy, diversity of voice. We're looking for those things. So then you set your news diet and you try to not let too much else in. When something else comes in, then you assess that. You can assess it in a vacuum now that it's not a torrent that has just dizzied you and you have no idea what's going on. So I think you're on the right track. I think you have a lot of good things going there. Your news diet sounds pretty good. Take stock of it, take inventory of it. Yeah. Question? Yes, please.
ProPublica, because I started giving to them a couple of years ago because they do so much to work with smaller papers.
Absolutely.
Help them.
Absolutely. There's another example, right, of an organization that has filled a social need, right, and an economic need as well. And, papers are completely gutted of resources. They're not able to do these things. ProPublica says, what if we produce content and then we partner with papers? It's sort of like a wire service was when that was a big advent 100 years ago. There's a different one for a different need, and it's saying, what if we come in, we produce the content more efficiently as a contractor, sort of, and we provide it to trusted news organizations? I'm a big fan. Why am I a big fan? It's not because they're great at journalism or they work with the right people or they did this expose or whatever. I'm a big fan because it's humans who are trying to do a good job telling the truth. Not trying to subvert science, not trying to be partisan poison, good journalism has never been about exactitude or what the truth is in a Kantian sense. Journalism's always been about the process and the intent. When I get humans together who want to do good journalism for the right reasons, I know good things can happen. I want to support those people. Yes?
Yeah, I noticed you haven't mentioned AP News, Associated Press. And I go there and it has all the world news there and all the different countries and U.S. And it seems like all the varieties there.
Yep.
So, and it's free.
Yep.
So, and I think that's diverse.
Yep. Oh, so thank you so much for bringing that up. That was my sin of omission. AP News, of course, love it. Wire service, impeccable brand, impeccable integrity. They do great work. And we need it especially 30 years ago or 40 years ago, the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, they had foreign bureaus all over the world, right? At least a few. The New York Times definitely did. They've all drastically reduced those. And the AP is another great organization that fills that void. And then other organizations also, like Amnesty International, I mentioned before, and many other global NGOs, they're figuring out how they might get into this space to perform some journalism. Now, the problem is building up the integrity, building up the credibility. That's not an easy trick to do. The intent, as long as the intent's there, you can build it, but it takes time, right? It takes time to build a trusted news organization. You can tear them down pretty fast, but to build them takes some time. But the AP News, absolutely, trusted source, impeccable. Doesn't mean perfect. It means that when they make a mistake, they try to own up to it. Yes?
So if all the legislation that, you know, suggest was in place, is there something specific you see that would be very different? I'm just trying to like narrow it down to what would be visible to the consumer of news.
Yep.
Once lots of this stuff kind of gets in place.
Yep.
Because it's been behind for so long.
Yeah.
That the companies are leading and experiencing the issues with it before anyone seems to ever be anticipating it.
Yep.
So, like, we missed the boat there, but if the next layer is in place, like, is it almost like some sort of filter that shows you who was editing it or who the source was, or like, because I think technology could help provide that in a real-time way instead of you having to go to all these other places. You know, almost like these ads are kind of annoying us right now, but like there would just be these little footnotes or something.
Yep. So it sounds like your question first was, you know, what's going to make the most immediate effect? And I'm gonna tackle that. I'm also going to say proportionality is a huge part of the story here, right? I shouldn't say, you know, my high school buddy who, you know, spends his afternoons in the Y and didn't graduate college is more of an expert on Facebook about the vaccine than Dr. Fauci, right? And they're both occupying the same space, right? We need to come up with Facebook needs to really work on technological improvements that provide some sense of context and proportion, right? And that's why disclosure identity is so important, right? Imagine a truth score for people on these different platforms, right? So when I am just constantly a purveyor of disinformation, that's going to do something to my ability to access eyeballs, right? Because right now, the biggest purveyors of disinformation tend to be having the most access to eyeballs. We have to turn that around, right? We have to figure out a way, a technological solution, to uplifting voices that nourish rather than voices that destroy, okay? Now, of course, the big part of the trick there is in making that decision. Now, to answer your question very directly on immediate change, absolutely. I think that the Warner-Klobuchar idea could make an immediate impact for 2024. And that's probably why, sadly, it won't get there, because both parties are going to be worried about losing an advantage on something, right? But I think we really need to clamp down on that kind of speech, you know, anonymous political speech that is, you know, we need to have transparency. We need to know where it's coming from and what it benefits. And too often that's not happening. I think that the Desaulnier one could have a pretty, not as rapid an impact, but you could see definitely that could change the economics of news gathering in a way that supports it better. Now, I think the biggest one could be, you know, if we really got serious as a Congress on creating a new regulatory body with great powers like the FCC, but just for the social media companies, right? A crack regulatory body that came in there to really clean house, right? That would get their attention big time. And they would start being proactive about doing things different on their platforms in the near term. A big change, you probably saw a big change. Oh, and the data revealing requirement would be huge too. We all probably saw a pretty significant change after 2016, right? Leading up to it was a real horror show. The Russians were going crazy on our Facebooks. And so was everyone else too. And it was all crazy all the time political. And that got tamped down soon after because it was serious just how severe the attack was. Zuckerberg's getting dragged in front of Congress. Things started changing there internally at Facebook pretty quickly. It got better.
PBS 3-part series on that. a lot about
Great tip.
the nations that Facebook went into and then disrupted so too.
Oh,
Um,
there are others besides Myanmar, by the way.
Right, there's quite a lot,
Yep.
actually, so. But like from today to so if we think about the press, when the press first was started, everyone got information, and was it all truthful? Probably not. So like, we're in a continuum with the internet, right?
Yes.
And 2016 was a hallmark in part of the lifespan of it.
Yes.
And we're not yet into the safety belt area, right?
I do
So
think, yes.
these are safety belts,
Yep.
but they're like not anticipating the next accident.
Yep.
You know?
Well, we built a theory over our 3 times together, right? Where we talked about the ebbs and flows of American democracy co-equal with our media systems. And we saw a lot of misuse and a lot of improvements, technological change. We saw backlash. We saw democratic impulse driving new change. I think that theory still holds. I think the tools are more powerful today. I think the peril is greater in some degree, especially with foreign intervention. I am optimistic, and I do think that we are, I'm a big believer in the darkest before dawn kind of point, and I do believe that we are at a lower point in the cycle, and I think better days are ahead. I think that in the coming years, the democratic backlash will equate to real action that changes our society in a way that not only changes the way our social media platforms are communicating to us, but how our democratic institutions are responding to that. But it won't work without us.
Do they have any programs that you know of, like at universities that are
Oh, yes.
equipping people for?
A great many. I mentioned Stony Brook in New York,
Yeah.
and please, Google can be your friend, and so please use that to look at more. Universities are really marching ahead on this, right? There's a lot of great institutes at universities across our country, and I'm very excited about those. They're always leading in terms of technology and study. So it's an exciting time. I do believe in the future, and I think that what we've been through will make us stronger. And also, if I leave you with anything, in addition to being responsible news consumers, I hope that it is, after 3 times together, that this is an exciting experiment. We have tools that can make our world a better place moving forward for our children and our grandchildren. And the future really is in our hands. There's danger, and there's always been danger. But let's lean on our governments, let's lean on our institutions, let's be part of that solution. Let's have a future of empowered information rather than disinformation. And with that, let's close.